Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Advanced Squad Leader Red Factories. Today we have the fourth German turn for the first day of the campaign. As always, weather doesn't seem to change. You'll note that there's an ever-increasing number of broken and debilitated squads, as well as equipment, of course, and that will generally follow the same sort of quote-unquote rules of ASL. It's not very uncommon to see more and more units get broken, and how do I put this? That stay broken, just because of the fact that with so many units running around, there's only so many leaders, and there's only so much time in every game. So at a certain point, you kind of have to choose when a unit breaks, whether or not you're actually going to try doing anything to save them. And unfortunately, I lose a crew to another casualty reduction rally attempt. It should be pointed out that if I haven't mentioned it before, a unit that attempts to self-rally has a +1 modifier added to their roll, but if they're in a building or woods location, then they subtract 1 as well. So generally speaking, you want to be in some sort of wood or building location. Even if they're not self-rallying, that also applies to a normal rally roll. There's a good example as to why exactly it gets really hard for low experience or low quality troops to ever come back to fighting strength, because having to roll a 4 is really tough, and unless you have good leaders or good rolls, as we saw, you're generally going to see those guys constantly be broken, or remain broken anyways. It's also why you want to be careful as to which units you do and do not choose to self-rally, because you get because the attacking player's turn. So, for instance, it's the German turn, so it's assumed that the German is attacking, and it's why they will move during their move phase. It's why you really want to make sure that the self rallies you take in this campaign, we're allowed 2, or at least in this map and so on. Anyways, we're allowed 2, so you want to make sure that you pick the right units that will actually be able to succeed. And obviously, you never have to take those 2 free self-rallies, but it is handy to use. As always with the Germans, I've got some tough choices to make up north. It's going to be a little easier the more and more I realize that, hey, being able to look at units at the second level is actually really useful, and I should probably put that to better use. But otherwise, it's certainly not something that I want to advance units into when there's, I don't know, probably about like 28 or so firepower staring me down. I should point out that it might seem weird to have weapons malfunction in a board game, Um, if you understand that guns constantly, well, I shouldn't say constantly, but especially in like crazy battle conditions, especially for something like Stalingrad, keeping proper maintenance and upkeep on your weapons is tough, and there's always going to be that sort of quality control issue where uh, you'll have a bullet that doesn't extract properly, or will jam the gun in some fashion, or the belt isn't super tight. Anyways, all to say that the reason why guns malfunction in this game is to sort of reflect that nature of combat. And generally speaking, depending on the weapon, there's also going to be a different repair number that sort of signifies just how easy or hard it was to clear that weapon. It also helps that some weapons are just much simpler, so you don't really have to worry about like how hard it is to clear that weapon. So far, the Russian leaders have all been rather lucky, and all been staying alive for quite a bit of time. It's one of the issues that you'll come across the further you play as the Russians. If anything has taught me anything about these campaign games, anyways, and it's definitely a resource that you don't want to throw away if possible. Unfortunately for me, even though that was a 12, which would have been really good, the cowering down to 8 and sniper roll is more annoying than anything else as the attacker here. Especially when I start rolling ones. And here I'd finally started to like use this guy in a observer mode and trying to set him up to do stuff, and immediately he gets broken. So, and now I got to figure out something else for that mortar to do. There's a couple shots that won't really make any sense to add firepower to. For example, even though I have a half squad that could add 1 firepower to this whole thing, it would only get me to 10, and as we've seen time and time again, that it just won't do anything. I was actually starting to get really worried that I would have even more sniper attacks do stuff. Oh, and I have rate of fire on that machine gun because I was able to roll a 1, a colored 1 on my dice roll. Now, under normal conditions, a rate of fire, whenever you get the rate of fire bonus, basically you wouldn't apply a prep fire or whatever counter that would fit the attack on that weapon, and you can immediately make you don't have to immediately, but in that same phase, you can make a following attack with that weapon. Keep in mind that a rate of fire shot doesn't apply to the entire stack, just the weapons which have rate of fire that was achieved. So, for example, if you have two weapons that your squad is shooting, one of them has a rate of fire of 2, and the other has a rate of fire of 1. If you roll a color 2 on your die roll, then only the weapon with the 2 rate of fire will be able to shoot again. The other weapon, unfortunately, will have been considered to use up its entire attack for that phase. I have quite a... Oh, I also forgot artillery again, of course. There's quite a bit for me to consider here in terms of my attacking position. Because I'm playing both sides, I already know that I'm sending a bunch of Russians over to the western side. Although that's fairly obvious, really, when you're looking at all the different moves that are going on. But because of the nature of all the debris everywhere, it's taken the Russians a bit of time to actually make their way and finally arrive. And meanwhile, I have a lot of broken squads that I really wish were active. That way I could presumably break through the Russian line at some point. But unfortunately, all my attempts so far have all been for naught. And it's getting really... I find it really tough to attack that position at the moment. Mainly because I can't get any sort of... any smoke to be thrown anywhere. I could theoretically take the chance at running a unit out into the street, pop some smoke, and then move back, or stay in that position. But the problem is that being exposed and so close to so many other units makes that a really tough proposition to actually follow through with. Especially since those 548s are actually really good, and I don't want to be throwing them away. Unfortunately for me, I don't get to casualty reduce that squad. That would have been really helpful, actually. But I'll take the break on the leader. This is sort of the way that you, with these little shots here and there, this is how you can really. It's why you really have to be able to modify plans on the fly. For example, in that previous shot, I wouldn't have had any real incentive to move my stern company 548s in hex. I think that's B9. 8210. Yeah, from B9 into B10, because moving there puts them at a high risk of being eliminated, thanks to the 2 squads plus the LMG that'd be point blank range into a debris that it just gives a +1. But now I have a real reason to actually throw a guy into C10, because one, if I put smoke there, it's defensive, so there's a lot more survivability there. But at the same time, I would then be forcing the leader in C11 as well as the broken squad into having to actually forcibly move, because if they don't, they're eliminated. Now, in a sort of thought process, if you were to eliminate the hedge that's on the border between C12 and D11, the 2 units would have a very hard time moving south, because C12 would be considered open ground and could be interdicted by a unit in E10. The way that line of sight is drawn and all that. Currently, it wouldn't apply just because of the some hedge rules giving a plus modifier and so on. So keeping it simple, they wouldn't, if that hedgerow wasn't there, or that hedge whatever wall wasn't there, the units wouldn't be able to route directly south without taking interdiction, which is good for the Germans. If I had units in say B10, then they wouldn't be able to route into B11 because that's still adjacent to whatever unit was there. And if they low crawl, then that just exposes them in the following turn. So you can see just all the differences and all the different like means that can be applied to your strategies on the fly as they go. So yeah, there's the issue with trying to get units into an adjacent location and throw some demolition charges at groups. I'm actually really lucky that I didn't suffer a worse result with that leader, and ultimately, had I been thinking about it a little bit better, I would have had like some sort of smoke or other setup in order to cover that guy as he's throwing or placing the demolition charge. The reason for this is that a unit trying to place a demolition charge counts as spending his movement factors in the hex he currently is in, rather than the hex that he's trying to place the demolition charge into. So what happens, basically anyways, what happens is that my leader got shot, and because he's in open ground, he has no defensive bonuses. So had I put down smoke, it could have been a +2 or +3 modifier to that. And obviously, if they're in a different hex, then it even more modifiers to it. So I guess basically what I'm trying to say is if you are trying to do something with either a leader or just a squad with the demolition charge, definitely look into placing something to give better cover to those sorts of units. Had it been that my leader would have taken the defensive bonus of the building, then I wouldn't have had any sort of issue placing the demolition charge. And that's also why, like thinking about it, that's also why that wouldn't apply, because then it'd always be easy for people to get in and place a demolition charge, even though theoretically the guys inside the building, if they were to shoot, they wouldn't be shooting inside, like at their own building. You know what I mean? Like the terrain effect modifiers make sense when you take into account how a unit would go about even placing a demolition charge. I also made a little goof with the Berserk unit. Berserk units are supposed to move first before everything else. Thankfully, though, in this instance, there was no real change. That Berserk unit would have still moved south 1 hex to get into the hex with enemy units. Another thing to keep in mind is that actually, I'm trying to think, because I know you can shoot obviously units that move, but I'm not entirely sure if a unit that moves into the same hex as friendly units, if it's fired upon, if it affects everybody. It shouldn't, but at the same time, I'm not 100% sure. I should say that whenever it comes to friendly fire, that's actually something that doesn't come up too often. Thankfully, I'm actually going to have that occur later on. But again, it's something that you don't really see all too frequently, and basically, like, you end up with just like scenarios that you're not 100% sure on because of it. It might seem a little odd that I haven't taken any like crazy shots versus the units going into that's G6 and 7. 6 nobody moved, so apologies, I misspoke. But the units getting into G7, the only reason I haven't shot at them is that I believe I had them assault move, so they're not taking any sort of negative to attacks against them, and the fact that the stone structure or the stone rubble gives them a +3, it's kind of not really worth taking a shot right now, especially when there's so many other units that can move, and I don't really want to risk it. This is sort of an example as to what I was talking about earlier with regards to having units move around and force routes. Had I been a little bit luckier, because my morale check was just 1 off, but had I been a little luckier, I would have had the 548 wouldn't have broken, and then I would have pressured the leader and the broken squad. This is also a misplay, I believe, from myself. On a subsequent fire, you have to shoot at a target that's next to you, rather than just closer to you. But let's actually check the rules, since I'm looking at the rulebook. Oh, never mind. So yeah, because they were closer, I think I'm thinking of final protective fire. Anyways, because those guys were closer than the previous squad that was being shot at, they managed to get that subsequent fire off. And honestly, those were some pretty lucky rolls to get a 1+, which is annoying to say the least. But I'm sure they'll recover eventually. It's actually a really good thing that that one Russian squad did so much, because again, the Russians can't really afford to start losing leaders, even though they have so many. You're not typically supposed to be getting a lot of high quality leaders, so the more they lose, the better. It just kind of like snowballs a little bit. Also, this is, I think, the 6th or so, 5th or 6th sniper activation or sniper roll that I've had to make, and I think the 3rd or 4th activation. There's one, actually, you know what, this might only be the 2nd one. There was at least one break, so. Now, I think at this point I'm checking the rules, because the closest unit to this sniper is the Berserk Squad. And again, Berserk Squads can't pin. So I believe it's just a null result, or it should actually casualty reduce, I believe. I'm trying to figure out why what exactly I'm waiting for here. See, this is like the quote unquote problem of wanting to do things by the book and having an online book that I can reference all the time. You just end up checking it time and time again. This is also one of those things where it'd probably be really handy to, like, if I had like a notepad and I could always just like reference, like, oh, why specifically this or that. I think the realization I came to was that Berserk units can't pin, and so they wouldn't casualty reduce. Yeah, so so that Berserk unit just stays how it is. Now I'm trying to figure out why I remembered it as being a casualty reduction. Anyways, I'm sure it'll come back to me at some point, or I'll just have to look up the rule again at some point. If anything, it was just lucky that actually happened, because since I don't have any sort of casualty reduction, then I don't have to worry about that unit getting pinned. Although I think by that same token, I had to pick another unit because that Berserk unit technically would have been not allowed. So you obviously can't choose it, and the sniper has to do something. So I had to pick the mortar group. I actually didn't expect those guys to have a line of sight on that. So it ends up being a straight 8 shot on 4 firepower, which is a null result, so. Thinking about it, I could have probably had. I've been doing a kind of a bad job with getting units to pick stuff up, even though it's like basically a free action. In order to accomplish, anyways. And I really should have probably had units pick stuff up, especially that LMG. The LMG would have probably been useful, especially since like targets that I'm apparently shooting at with the heavy machine gun is actually like fairly close, or at least I could pass it on to somebody else. Similarly, the leader grabbing the anti-tank rifle would have been useful, if only for what I had mentioned in a previous video, where a support weapon it applies that 1 firepower up to 12 hexes, which is actually really good to counter route from your opponent. And unfortunately, that machine gun post just, it still hasn't been able to actually do much. Similarly, I really wish that, kind of wish that that squad had been able to do something. I think I had designated both of those squads out in the open ground next to the wall to do something, but one squad couldn't shoot just because it doesn't have a line of sight, and I mean, yeah, having a pin task check and those guys pinning just makes it that much harder. Because I would have really liked for that squad to actually be able to shoot at not a quarter of their firepower. Having something quartered like that is just, it's really tough. And especially when you're moving, because now it's like I have to wait until the next turn, basically, for them to be able to do anything, and it has to be after the prep fire phase and move. Well, technically it could be during the move, but you're waiting a lot anyways. And once again, I get another good roll on a move. It's over the range, so it's just a 2 firepower, but that is 2 firepower, down 1 for open ground, down 1 for non-assault movement, and down another 1 for the -1 leader. So we're looking at another elimination of a half squad. And because it was a 2 firepower attack, residual firepower means there's 1 that's left on that specific X. There's no hindrance or anything, so I don't have to worry about anything else in terms of decreasing the value of that residual firepower. And this is also, I guess I'm just like in the mood of pointing this out, this video, but this is also another reason why you have to be able to balance several ideas at the same time when it comes to your tactics. Because initially I wanted to move both of those guys down south along that F hex grid. And while moving down, I'd be able to move them into the stone structures, so there's less for me to worry about. And like they're defended, and I can kind of like propagate my guys through there. The idea that I'm having right now is that if I can populate the F line of stone structures, because basically like the stone rubble and structures there follow like a continuous line thanks to the trench, I'd be able to effectively like section off the extreme like western outliers of the Russian force, those like 4 squads or whatever, and everything else, while also providing my units with a lot of cover, because those +3s is going to be really useful. And unfortunately, me checking the line of sight there I should be applying a first fire or final fire on that guy, but I forget if I actually do that. And yeah, now that the move phase is over, I can actually decide to shoot at a couple of units. The fact that that stone rubble, it's a +3, so it is formidable, but I have 2 leaders, and that's a really good roll. So because I have 2 leaders, I can apply a dice roll modifier to that roll, because of the fact that I have both of them have at least a -1 as their modifier. I get to add the -1. So at the end of the day, that shot is only on a +2, and it was, I forget how much, it was like 12 or 16 firepower. And when you only have to add, when it's a 5 on 12 or 8, whichever, that's still really, really good. Now, there's two applicable units, and because one is closer, or one has a lower TEM than the other, I'm quote unquote forced to choose the group with 3 squads. This is also another reason why sometimes you don't want to build huge stacks, because you end up being unlucky and roll a 5 and a 6 and a 6. Now, had the roll been instead to like kill the units, then that would have been even worse, because the Russians would have lost two squads completely. I guess I should point out, I think by the end of maybe not this video, I forget when I do it, but I rename a second leader for the Russians. The only reason why the 7-0 is named after somebody is I'd asked them if they wanted the best or worst leader, and so they picked the worst. And honestly, if a 7-0 is your worst leader, then that's actually pretty okay. And also, yeah, so I had checked line of sight, and this is why you always roll on, it's why you make an opponent roll on a line of sight check, because the line of sight was right over the building, which means that I couldn't make that shot, even though it kind of looked like I would have been able to. So now I just triggered a sniper, and I just pinned this guy. Had I broken him, it would have been even worse. But I'll take a pin any day. It would be even worse too if it happened to be a unit that was next to one of my own, because once you get into melee, again, we've seen the effects of pin where it does actually have your firepower even in a close combat phase, which is very powerful in the right or wrong circumstances. And as always, even though a shot by a unit did not produce any results, you still have to apply a token on them, which is just, a good idea in case something like you forget, which is going to happen in a game as lively as this one. Now, I learned that you can actually, like, advancing fire a berserk unit, which I always thought, I thought was kind of weird. I don't know, like, specifically, I guess it just, like, gives the berserk unit the chance to, like, shoot before they actually get into a close combat, like, sequence. But in a way, it was kind of counterintuitive, because I never think about it. I always just assume that once a unit gets into the same hex as another, it like immediately cedes the ability to shoot. Now, a unit that is in the same hex as another, It's actually called triple point blank fire. Triple point blank fire is actually, it's super good, and it's kind of a shame that I only had when you only have a half squad, like you're not going to get too good of a result out of it. Where does this say specifically? Another thing that applies to the advanced fire phase, but I don't know how often I'm ever going to actually do it, is opportunity fire. Opportunity fire is actually something that you have to declare at the start. Well, I forget if it's at the start specifically of the prep phase fire, or prep fire phase, but it is something that you have to actually declare. And once you declare, that unit is considered to like be using up its move and stuff. Also, yeah, that clips the building. Even if just a little bit, it still clips that corner. So I will have to roll. And thankfully, I don't get another sniper activation. But getting back to opportunity fire, it's something you have to declare during the prep fire phase. And effectively, that unit can't do anything for the entire turn up until it gets to the advanced fire phase, and then it can shoot. The benefit of declaring an opportunity fire is that you effectively keep its full firepower up until that advanced fire phase. So if you know that there's going to be a couple units, if you're trying to like flush out a group, or better yet, if you want to expose units, because let's face it, I probably we haven't seen it too much in this specific series of videos yet. But when you have a bunch of units that are concealed, you kind of have a really big choice to make. Your first choice, obviously, is to shoot at them. Make a big stack, shoot at them, and through firepower, reveal who is where. And I think I've always relied on that, especially in my quote-unquote earlier days with Advanced Squad Leader. But the problem with doing that is that if I miss my shot in the prep fire phase, then those guys can't do anything, period, and I've wasted my shots. If I declare opportunity fire with at least a portion, a sizable portion, mind you, but at least with a portion of the initial fire group I wanted to do, then I would at the very least, be able to do something along the lines of, say, discovering who is behind that concealment counter by moving into their location, and then using that firepower that is still at its max capability in the advanced fire phase to do whatever as a follow-up. While you are indicating who will and will not be moving, which, depending on how you look at it, could be a negative because you're kind of giving away something to your opponent, you kind of do the same thing if you just simply prep fire. And honestly, the benefits of just sending one unit in to not lose half of your firepower and potentially have them survive or, reveal other stuff can be very powerful. I'm not sure if I'm actually confused here or something else. I think I was thinking of a specific rule or something, but I might have had it confused because I should have excuse me, I should have had that second 548 squad route to C10 and then keep moving, but for whatever reason I think I just low crawled them up north, even though that puts them in the line of sight of that SMG Company A in the fortified building nearby. Yeah, this selection quote-unquote bug happens quite a bit. It's a little annoying. So, I think the specific instance with regards to that Berserk squad is that on those rare in the rules it says on those rare occasions or instances when fire attacks are allowed versus units in the same location as the attacker, or versus PRC, which we're not going to see. The firepower of the attacking unit is tripled, hereafter referred to as triple point blank fire. As IFT attacks are not allowed by units in melee, such occurrences versus non-PRC are usually limited to instances in which infantry are allowed to enter an enemy-occupied location during the movement phase. And since my Berserk unit was allowed to move into that specific location during the movement phase, they're not immediately locked into melee, I don't believe. And because they're not immediately locked into that, then they're allowed to shoot. Here we go. So in Rule A15.432, kind of gives you an idea as to how nitty-gritty some rules can get. It specifically states that the Berserk unit may also attack with triple point-blank fire during its advanced fire phase, but this triple point-blank fire is halved due to taking place in the advanced fire phase. Survivors are not yet held in melee, and the stack is marked with a CC counter to indicate this. So I should have put a close combat counter to signify that he had taken his shot during the advanced fire phase, but I didn't put it on. It's also why that unit didn't actually do much, even though it should have been 6 firepower. It was halved back down to 2 because 3 isn't a column, and it's also why it gets really strong once you have more and or better Berserk units, because even though it's halved, if you have, instead of 4, you'd have 6. If you had an even stronger unit, say like 15, you're down to 7.5, so on and so forth. I'm actually not sure if a unit with Berserk can apply a assault fire with its triple point blank fire, which would just be absurd because that's a lot of firepower right there. Yeah, it doesn't seem to say that Berserk units can't use assault fire, so I assume that that would also apply, which just makes it that much stronger. So here we have the close combat between the Berserk and the other units. I should be unbreaking them just to see what their firepower is, because it's still important to calculations. And although I can have both of them like die and stuff, I'd rather at least try to salvage one of them. Obviously, 7 morale is going to be a lot more attractive than the 5 that's available. Although, now that I think about it, I wonder if a broken unit can cover. I'll have to look that up at a later date. Effectively, what I'm trying to do is save one of the squads by having the other stay behind and take the brunt force of that Berserk unit. I guess technically what I should have also done is, although I don't think it would apply, I'm not sure if an ambush would have applied, just because of I didn't advance into that location, and usually that's the impetus to an ambush roll, as you have to advance in the advance phase. Yeah, so whenever an infantry advances into CC in a woods building, etc., it does not say move into a location. So the basic idea is that because it's not advancing, you don't go through an ambush because you guys are considered, and it makes sense that that's why after the shots you would put the close combat phase counter on it to signify that you're already in it and not you don't have ambush applied to it. And because the rifle company actually eliminated a unit as a berserk unit, they drop that status. They're no longer affected by berserk status. I think the only reason I didn't pick the 7 morale one was because the others' firepower is higher. But yeah, not 100% sure on it, unfortunately. And even though the Germans are actually really close at getting something, it's still a null result. So the melee there will continue for at least one more turn. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.